He was just a janitor's son, sweeping floors while others dreamed in marble halls. To the wealthy, he was invisible. To the powerful, he was a punchline. And then came the night when a billionaire, surrounded by applause and champagne, sneered at him and said, "If you can play this piano, I'll adopt you." The room erupted in laughter, but Marcus didn't flinch, because hidden inside him was something no one expected, something his mother had left him, a truth carried in music. And when his hands finally touched the keys, what poured out was more than a song. It was a revelation. But what they didn't know was that this performance would expose a secret, one shocking truth his mother had hidden in the music, a truth powerful enough to silence a millionaire and leave the entire room in awe. Marcus Reed was 12 years old, and his world was built on shadows. Shadows of privilege that passed over him without notice, shadows of laughter that followed him down gleaming hallways, and the shadow of grief that lingered in his father's tired eyes. His father worked as a janitor at the most prestigious private academy in the city, a place where chandeliers sparkled and pianos gleamed, where every student carried not only books but also the weight of legacy. Marcus didn't belong to that world. His place was after school hours, when the hallways emptied and silence returned. He carried a mop, not a satchel. He emptied bins, not notebooks. But Marcus had something no one could see, a gift carefully hidden, born of love and loss. Years earlier, before illness carried her away, Marcus's mother had been his first teacher. She wasn't a professor or a musician by trade. She was simply a woman who believed music was the language of truth. With her old second-hand keyboard, she taught him scales, melodies, and the art of listening, not just with ears, but with the heart. "Music," she used to whisper, guiding his small fingers across chipped keys, "is what reveals who we are. Someday, Marcus, the world will hear you. And when that day comes, they won't be able to ignore you." Her death broke their family. His father sank into silence, working longer hours to fill the void. The keyboard gathered dust, and Marcus's music became a secret locked inside him. Until, on nights when the weight of the world pressed too heavily, he'd sneak into the church 2 blocks away. There, in the dim glow of stained glass and flickering candles, he found refuge in the piano. But there was one piece his mother had forbidden him to share too soon. A piece she claimed carried her final gift, a secret meant only for the right moment. It was a composition of sorrow and triumph, of struggle and hope. She told him, "Play this when the world mocks you, Marcus. Let the music answer for you." That secret, hidden in music, would become the shock no one expected. At the academy, Marcus blended into the background. Students barely looked at him, teachers brushed past him, yet he noticed everything. He noticed how they carried themselves, how laughter rolled easily from their lips, how the piano in the recital hall sat like a jewel, admired and untouched. Each time he walked past it, his chest ached with longing. It was during one of those moments, mop in hand, gaze lingering too long, that he caught the eye of Jonathan Kingsley. Kingsley was a billionaire industrialist, a man whose name decorated buildings and whose donations shaped futures. That evening he had come to watch his daughter's rehearsal. His suit gleamed under the hall lights, and his voice carried the confidence of unchecked authority. When his gaze fell on Marcus, it wasn't curiosity. It was dismissal disguised as humor. "Look at that," Kingsley said loudly, ensuring everyone nearby could hear. The janitor's boy staring at a piano. "What's next?" thinking he can play it. Laughter spread, soft at first, then sharper. Marcus's cheeks burned. Kingsley stepped closer, smirking. "Tell you what, if you can play that piano, I'll adopt you myself." "Imagine that, mop buckets to mansions just like that," the adults chuckled. A few tried to hide their amusement behind polite smiles. No one defended Marcus. To them, it was just harmless fun, a powerful man joking at the expense of a powerless child. Marcus gripped his mop tighter. He didn't respond, but inside, something shifted. His mother's voice returned. "When the world mocks you, let the music answer." That night, Marcus lay awake, replaying every word. Kingsley's sneer wasn't just mockery, it was a challenge. And deep down, Marcus knew the time had come to play the forbidden piece. As the Academy prepared for its annual gala, a dazzling night of performances, donors, and spectacle, Marcus prepared in secret. Each night, while the city slept, he returned to the church piano. He practiced until his fingers ached, pouring every ounce of grief, every memory of his mother, every humiliation he endured, into the keys. By the time the gala arrived, Marcus wasn't just ready to play. He was ready to reveal the truth his mother had hidden in the music, and when Kingsley mocked him again, as Marcus knew he would, the boy would step forward, not as a janitor's son, not as a punchline, but as a voice the world could no longer ignore. The gala night glittered like a jewel, but for Marcus it was another reminder of the world he didn't belong to. The Academy had been scrubbed spotless, windows gleaming like mirrors, carpets stretched taut and clean. Every surface reflected wealth. Every detail screamed prestige. Men in tailored suits arrived with wives in flowing gowns. Laughter rippled through the corridors, champagne glasses clinked, and students in polished uniforms stood ready to perform for applause. Marcus moved through it all like a shadow. He carried trays of empty glasses, swept corners where no one looked, and slipped between the crowd unnoticed. He wore his father's oversized shirt, tucked neatly, his sneakers clean but worn. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He had learned long ago that invisibility was his shield, but invisibility came with its own sting. Every time Marcus passed a group, he caught whispers. Not always cruel, but cutting in their indifference. The janitor's boy. Why is he here? He should stay in the back. Each remark was another pebble dropped into the growing weight in his chest. At the heart of the hall stood the grand piano, glossy black, polished to perfection, its lid open to reveal strings and hammers that seemed to shimmer in the golden light. Students eyed it nervously, knowing they'd soon have to face it. Donors admired it casually, as if it were just another ornament. But for Marcus, it was something else entirely. He remembered the first time his mother had placed his fingers on the keys of a battered keyboard. He remembered the joy in her eyes, the way her voice had lifted when she said, "This, Marcus, is where truth lives." That same truth now glowed from the piano under the chandelier, and he knew the time was coming when he'd have to face it. Jonathan Kingsley arrived late, as always. His presence commanded attention even before he spoke. The billionaire swept into the room, his suit sharp, his shoes polished, his expression one of amused authority. People parted for him like waves retreating from a rock. He walked with his arm around his daughter, a piano prodigy who had been trained since birth, whose performances always drew gasps of admiration. When Kingsley saw Marcus, his lips curled into the same smirk as before. He raised his glass slightly, as if in a toast, and said loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "Well, well, the little janitor boy is still hanging around the piano. Careful, son. You might think you belong here." The laughter was quieter this time, but no one spoke against him. Marcus felt the weight of eyes pressing into him. His ears burned, but he didn't lower his gaze. For the first time, he looked directly at Kingsley, just for a moment. Then he turned and walked back to his corner. But Kingsley wasn't finished. During intermission, when guests mingled and the piano stood empty, Kingsley's voice cut through the murmur like a blade. "Tell you what," he said, gesturing toward Marcus with the ease of a man tossing scraps to a dog. "Why don't we give the janitor's boy a chance? Remember what I said? If you can play this piano, I'll adopt you." The room erupted in chuckles, though some were uneasy. The cruelty was sharper now, less like humor and more like spectacle. Kingsley thrived in it. Marcus froze. His heart thundered. His father, standing by the catering table, stiffened in shock. His face drained of color. "Don't," his father whispered hoarsely, almost too soft to hear. "It's not worth it." But Marcus heard another voice too, the one that had guided him through the years, through grief and loneliness. His mother's voice, "When the world mocks you, let the music answer." Marcus stepped forward. The crowd shifted, whispers rising. His sneakers squeaked faintly against the polished floor, He walked past donors who smirked, students who snickered, and teachers who looked away. His father reached for his arm, but Marcus slipped free. He approached the piano slowly, every step heavier than the last. When he reached the bench, he didn't sit immediately. He let his fingers brush the glossy edge, tracing the surface like a memory. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in deeply. This was the moment his mother had prepared him for, the moment the forbidden peace had waited for, and yet doubt pressed hard against him. Could he really do this? In front of everyone who had dismissed him? Could he reveal his secret? Kingsley laughed, breaking the silence. "Come now, boy. Don't tell me you're afraid." The crowd chuckled again. Marcus sat down. His hands hovered above the keys. His chest tightened and his pulse roared in his ears. He pressed one note, soft, trembling. The sound lingered in the hall, unexpected in its clarity. Then, just as he was about to begin, a sharp hand gripped his shoulder. It was his father. His eyes were filled with fear, almost desperation. "Marcus, stop," he whispered fiercely. "Not like this. Not in front of them." The room held its breath. The boy sat frozen between two worlds, the safety of silence and the danger of truth. And that was when Marcus made his choice. Marcus's father's hand pressed firmly on his shoulder. His voice trembled with fear. "Son, don't give them the satisfaction. They don't deserve your music." But Marcus shook his head gently. His eyes, so young yet carrying a weight far older, met his father's. "It's not for them," he whispered. "It's for her." His father's grip loosened. Confusion and sorrow battled across his face, but he stepped back, powerless to stop what was coming. Marcus turned back to the keys. His fingers trembled, then steadied. The crowd murmured with impatience. Kingsley smirked, swirling the wine in his glass. "Well then, let's have our little show." The first chord rang out, soft but resonant. The sound silenced the whispers instantly. Marcus began with scales, delicate, cautious, as though testing the air. The melody was simple at first, almost fragile. A few guests exchanged amused looks, whispering, "He knows a few notes." Kingsley chuckled under his breath, but then the music shifted. His fingers moved faster, weaving a tune richer than anyone expected. Layers of sound rippled through the hall, rising and falling with unexpected grace. The crowd leaned in, curiosity sparking. It wasn't flawless, the nerves were still there, but the soul behind it was undeniable. Kingsley's smirk faltered slightly. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Marcus's father clutched the back of a chair, torn between dread and awe. He had never seen his son like this, commanding a room not with words but with music. The piece built momentum. Marcus poured himself into the piano, every note carrying his loneliness, his memories, his grief. The sound grew fuller, richer, echoing through the vaulted ceiling. Students who had mocked him stared in disbelief. A teacher covered her mouth, whispering, "My God, he's incredible." But Kingsley would not concede so easily. He rose to his feet, laughing loudly to shatter the spell. "A parlor trick. Don't be fooled, he's probably memorized a child's tune." The interruption jolted Marcus, his fingers faltering for half a second. A ripple of uncertainty passed through the room. Kingsley grinned, satisfied. Marcus closed his eyes. He remembered his mother's face, her hands guiding his own, her voice saying, "When they try to silence you, play louder." His fingers crashed into the keys with renewed force. This wasn't just music, it was defiance. The melody surged, climbing higher, filling the hall with a power that no sneer could diminish. The guests froze. The room, moments earlier filled with smug laughter, now held only the music. Even Kingsley's mocking smile stiffened, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Marcus shifted seamlessly into a piece no one recognized. It wasn't one of the recital songs, nor a famous composition. It was the forbidden piece, his mother's song, the one she had told him to save for the moment when the world tried to crush him. The opening notes were soft, haunting. They whispered like secrets through the air, delicate but commanding attention. The hall seemed to shrink around him. Every breath, every glance, every heartbeat was drawn toward the piano. Guests leaned forward unconsciously, compelled. Teachers exchanged bewildered looks. None of them knew this composition, yet it carried the weight of something timeless. Marcus's father's eyes widened. Recognition flashed in them. He had heard it once before, long ago, when his wife had played it in their small apartment. He realized now she had left Marcus more than just memory. She had left him a legacy. Kingsley clenched his jaw, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. What nonsense is this? Some little trick his mother taught him? Impressive for a janitor's son, perhaps, but nothing more. But his words rang hollow, because the music told a story no insult could erase. The piece swelled, no longer hesitant. It soared with grief, dipped into sorrow, then rose again in defiance. Marcus's fingers flew across the keys, guided by memory and something deeper, something that felt like his mother's spirit moving through him. The chandelier lights seemed to shimmer in rhythm. The very air vibrated with sound. Some guests felt tears prick their eyes, though they couldn't explain why. Others shifted uncomfortably, as though the music forced them to confront truths they had buried. Marcus was no longer invisible. He was undeniable, and yet this was only the beginning. The music had become something alive. Each note carried its own breath, each chord its own heartbeat. Marcus was no longer a boy at the piano. He was a vessel for something larger, something that had waited years to be heard. The guests leaned forward as if pulled by invisible strings. Even the servers, frozen with trays in hand, forgot their duties. The melody reached into corners no broom had ever touched, sweeping away dust not of dirt but of prejudice. Marcus's father stood with trembling hands. Pride fought against fear. He saw his son illuminated in the glow of the chandelier, saw his wife's reflection in the tilt of Marcus's head, the movement of his fingers. Tears filled his eyes. He whispered under his breath, "He's playing for you, Sarah. He's playing for us." But Jonathan Kingsley was not moved. At least, he would not allow himself to show it. His face was taut, his jaw rigid, his hand clutching his glass with unnecessary force. The music was powerful. He couldn't deny it. But to admit it would be to concede power to a boy he had deemed worthless. He rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble with a jarring screech. The sound broke the spell for a moment. "Enough of this nonsense," Kingsley declared, his voice booming across the hall. "This is a gala, not a circus. He's humiliating himself." The words fell flat. No laughter followed. The audience remained silent, their eyes fixed on Marcus. Kingsley's interruption had revealed more about himself than about the boy. Marcus didn't flinch. His fingers never left the keys. If anything, his playing grew stronger, bolder. The forbidden piece responded like a flame starved of oxygen suddenly given air. It roared to life, shaking the hall with its power. The music surged into a storm of sound, notes cascading like thunder, chords striking like lightning. Guests clutched the arms of their chairs, their bodies tense, their eyes wide. Some felt their hearts pounding in sync with the rhythm, as though the piano had reached inside them and taken control. Kingsley barked out a laugh, too loud, too forced. A trick! Just a trick. But no one echoed him. The smirk on his face looked more like a grimace now. Marcus closed his eyes, lost in the song. The hall faded away. He wasn't playing for Kingsley or the guests. He wasn't even playing for himself. He was playing for his mother. Every note carried her memory, every rise and fall her voice. She was with him in the music, guiding him. The forbidden piece began to reveal its secret. Hidden within the melody was a theme, a pattern of notes that repeated like a message encoded in sound. To the untrained ear, it was simply haunting. But to those who truly listened, it told a story of rejection, of a dream denied, of an audition at this very academy years ago, when a young black woman had been turned away not because of her lack of talent, but because of the color of her skin. That woman was Marcus's mother, and her composition was her testimony. The audience felt it without knowing. A collective ache spread through the room, a sense of injustice woven into the fabric of the music itself. Teachers shifted uncomfortably, realizing what they were hearing was more than performance. It was confession, revelation, accusation. Kingsley's daughter, seated near the stage, lowered her eyes. Her hands, trained since childhood to play flawlessly, trembled in her lap. She had practiced for years, striving for technical perfection, but never once had she felt the weight of truth in her music. Watching Marcus, she realized she had been taught notes, but not soul. The boy's playing softened suddenly, dipping into a valley of sorrow. The room leaned in. Each note lingered longer, aching with loss. A woman in the front row wiped a tear from her cheek, embarrassed but unable to stop. Then the music began to climb again, step by step, chord by chord, until it reached a crescendo so powerful it seemed the walls themselves might crack. The chandelier rattled faintly, glasses on tables trembled, and when the sound broke, it wasn't noise, it was liberation. Marcus's father pressed a fist to his lips, tears running freely down his face. He understood now. His wife hadn't left their son a burden. She had left him a weapon, a truth disguised as beauty. The final notes of the section echoed into silence. The audience sat stunned, breathless, as though the air had been stolen from their lungs. No one dared speak, and then Marcus shifted again. His fingers hovered, trembling, before diving into the final movement of the forbidden piece. This was the part his mother had warned him of, the part she said carried a secret the world wasn't ready for. The notes were jagged, sharp, filled with pain. They told of doors slammed shut, of laughter that cut deeper than knives, of talent dismissed without consideration. But woven into the pain was defiance, a refusal to be erased. The guests could feel it. They weren't just listening to music. They were hearing history, injustice, survival. Some turned their eyes away, ashamed. Others leaned forward, captivated, unable to escape. Kingsley stood rigid, his face pale. The mask of arrogance cracked. He knew the story behind this piece. He had been there years ago when a young woman auditioned and was dismissed by a panel he influenced. He had been one of those who laughed. Now her son sat at the piano, delivering her voice through his hands, and Kingsley was powerless to stop it. The room was no longer his. The final movement roared to life, and with it, the entire hall seemed to quake. Marcus's fingers blurred across the keys, striking with a force no one thought possible from such small, worn hands. The sound wasn't just music anymore. It was confrontation. Every note demanded recognition. Every chord forced the listeners to see him, to hear him, to feel him. The audience sat transfixed. Guests who had once laughed now clutched their armrests. Teachers leaned forward, eyes wide, their mouths parted. Students who had mocked him only days before stared with expressions that wavered between awe and shame. And then, woven into the rising fury of the composition, came a phrase, a haunting, repeating motif. Subtle at first, then stronger, like a voice breaking through the storm. To some, it was only melody, but to Marcus's father, it was memory. He staggered back, his breath catching. It was the exact phrase his wife had played during her audition at the academy all those years ago. The same phrase she had whispered about on her deathbed. "This will be my truth, Marcus. Promise me you'll only share it when the world mocks you." Tears rolled down his cheeks. He whispered, "She's here. She's here in this room." Others began to realize it too. An older teacher, who had been at the academy for decades, pressed a hand to her mouth. She remembered the audition. A black woman, barely older than the students, had played with brilliance. But whispers of "not the right image" and "not our tradition" had swayed the decision. She had been turned away. That woman was Marcus's mother. Now her music returned, undeniable, immortal, carried by the hands of her son. The motif grew louder, transforming from sorrow into defiance. It threaded through the melody like a declaration, as if shouting, "You tried to silence me, but here I am. You tried to erase me, but I endure." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Their wealth, their power, their privilege, all seemed fragile under the weight of the music. It wasn't just a performance. It was an indictment. Kingsley's face turned ashen. He gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles white. He remembered that audition. He remembered laughing with the panel, dismissing her. He had thought nothing of it, just another name forgotten. But now, her son stood in front of him, turning the entire hall against him with nothing but sound. "Stop him!" Kingsley barked suddenly, his voice cracking with desperation. "This is madness. He's disgracing the academy." But no one moved. Not a teacher, not a student, not a single guest. The only sound was the piano, thundering through every corner, filling the air with undeniable truth. Marcus's eyes were closed, his brow furrowed with focus. He wasn't aware of the panic around him. He wasn't aware of Kingsley's shouting. He was somewhere else, somewhere between memory and revelation, playing not just for himself but for his mother, his father, for every person who had ever been dismissed. The crescendo reached its peak. Marcus's small frame shook with the effort, his entire body moving with the rhythm. The chandelier overhead trembled as though responding to the force of his mother's song. And then, suddenly, the music dropped to a whisper. Soft, fragile notes trickled through the silence like falling tears. Each one lingered, echoing in the hushed hall. The transition was so unexpected, so vulnerable that the audience leaned forward instinctively, straining to catch every sound. This was the heart of the piece. The secret his mother had buried in the music. It wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was hope. The melody shifted from sorrow to something brighter, still tinged with pain, but reaching toward light. It was the sound of survival, of resilience, of a love that refused to die. Marcus's father collapsed into a chair, sobbing openly. Guests wiped at their eyes, some ashamed, some moved beyond words. The older teacher who remembered his mother whispered hoarsely, "Forgive us." Even Kingsley, rigid and pale, could not hide the flicker of fear in his eyes. For the first time he looked small, stripped of his authority. The boy he had mocked, the child he had reduced to a joke, had just torn his power away without a single word. The final notes rang out, gentle yet unyielding. They lingered in the air, vibrating long after Marcus lifted his hands. He sat frozen, chest heaving, his fingers trembling above the keys. Silence followed. Not the silence of indifference, but the silence of a world that had just been changed. Then, slowly, it broke. A single clap, then another, and suddenly the hall erupted. Applause thundered through the room, louder than the music itself. Guests rose to their feet, their cheers echoing off marble and glass. Some shouted, others wept openly. Marcus's father stood too, pride shining through his tears. For the first time, he saw his son not as the janitor's boy, not even as his child, but as an artist who had reclaimed a stolen voice. Kingsley did not clap. He sank into his chair, his face twisted with fury and humiliation. His daughter looked at him with something like shame, then turned away, joining the ovation for Marcus. The balance of power had shifted. In one performance, the boy Kingsley mocked had dismantled his authority and revealed the truth. The climax was complete. But the story wasn't over yet. Because now came the question, what would happen after the applause faded? The thunderous applause continued, wave after wave crashing through the grand hall. For a moment, Marcus sat frozen at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the sound. He had never been in the center of anything before, never the focus of admiration, never the reason for standing ovations. His entire life had been spent in corners, cleaning up after others. And now, in one unforgettable performance, he had become the center of it all. His father stepped forward slowly, almost hesitant, as if afraid that approaching might shatter the moment. But when he reached the stage and placed a trembling hand on Marcus's shoulder, the boy looked up with wide, tear-filled eyes. The two didn't speak. They didn't need to. In that single glance, his father saw his wife again, alive through the hands of their son. The guests clapped until their palms ached. Some, flushed with emotion, cheered loudly. Others simply stood in silence, tears slipping down their faces, humbled by what they had witnessed. And scattered among them were those who shifted uncomfortably, guilt gnawing at their insides, forced to confront the prejudice they had once laughed at or ignored. On the edge of the room, Jonathan Kingsley sat stone-faced, refusing to join the ovation. His jaw was clenched so tightly it looked as though it might crack. His glass of wine trembled in his hand. The billionaire, so used to commanding every room he entered, was invisible now. Nobody looked to him for approval. Nobody echoed his laughter. The crowd that once bowed to his influence was captivated instead by a janitor's son. Kingsley tried to stand, to reassert himself, but his legs felt heavy. His daughter tugged at his sleeve, her eyes shining with something between awe and disappointment. For the first time, she wasn't looking at her father with admiration. She was looking past him toward Marcus and the truth Kingsley had tried so hard to bury. Marcus rose slowly from the bench. He turned to face the audience, his hands still trembling from the force of the music. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't basking in the applause. He simply stood quietly, almost shyly, like a boy who had never expected to be seen. The ovation grew louder. It wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. One of the Academy's senior teachers stepped forward, her face pale but her eyes glistening. She had been there the day Marcus's mother was turned away. Shame weighed on her shoulders like chains, but she lifted her chin and addressed the crowd. Years ago, this Academy failed a brilliant musician. Tonight, her son has reminded us of our blindness. Let this never happen again. The room fell quiet at her words, then erupted once more in applause, not just for Marcus's talent, but for the truth he had revealed. His father wrapped an arm around his shoulders, holding him close. "Your mother's proud, son," he whispered hoarsely. "She's proud," and Marcus, for the first time since her death, believed it. The gala ended in a way no one expected. The conversations weren't about the donors or the wealth, but about the boy at the piano. His name spread quickly. Marcus Reed, the janitor's son who had silenced a billionaire with music. Some guests promised scholarships, others spoke of mentorships. For Marcus, those offers mattered less than the truth. He had been seen. Truly seen. Kingsley left quietly, slipping into the night with his head down. For a man who lived for attention, it was the deepest humiliation. His power had been built on dismissing those beneath him, and tonight, a boy he had mocked had torn that foundation apart. But Marcus didn't play for revenge. He hadn't sat at the piano to shame Kingsley. He had played for his mother, for his father, for the truth that had waited too long in silence. In the days that followed, whispers of his performance spread far beyond the Academy walls. Some dismissed it as a moment of spectacle. Others called it a turning point. For Marcus, it was something simpler, the beginning of a life where he no longer needed to hide his gift. He still swept floors with his father. He still wore hand-me-down clothes. But now, when he walked through the Academy, students didn't mock him. They stepped aside, their laughter gone, replaced by something like respect, or perhaps shame. Teachers glanced at him differently, with a recognition they couldn't deny. And every evening, when the halls emptied and the lights dimmed, Marcus sat at the piano. Not to prove himself, not to perform, but to honor the woman who had given him truth wrapped in music. His mother's forbidden peace was no longer a secret. It was a legacy. The world had tried to silence her. Her son had made sure it never would again. The story of Marcus Reed isn't just about a boy and a piano. It's about the cruelty of prejudice, the arrogance of power, and the resilience of truth. It's about how brilliance can be ignored, mocked, or buried, but never destroyed. Because when the world tries to silence you, sometimes all it takes is the courage to sit down and let the music answer. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Watch our previous video for another powerful story they tried to silence. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach the world, reminding us that truth, no matter how long ignored, will always find its voice.